Hello, Gary. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Ivan. Thank you for inviting me as a guest.
I'm very happy to have you in UFO Disclosure Bulgaria. You're for first time in with us, but I think that you can have a special place in UFO Disclosure Bulgaria because you've done very serious job. But before to continue with that, can you tell us a little bit more about you?
Okay. I began my interest in UFOs when I was 16 years of age. I had a childhood sighting in my hometown, which was called Scunthorpe in Lincolnshire in the United Kingdom, England. And just cutting the story short, I was walking my then girlfriend home one evening in, I think it was August of 1976, and it was a lovely night where all the stars were out. And then we saw this strange white light, much bigger than the background stars. And as it went past us, it seemed to trigger a power cut. The whole power in the area of the housing, street lamps went off. And then we kept watching it, and then it went off again. And I had my bicycle with me at the time. So I said to my then girlfriend, get on the crossbar. I will drop you off at your house, and then I'm going to try to catch up with this very slow moving light. And that's what I did. And cutting a long story short, I was able to get in front of the object near to my home. I dropped my bicycle outside the house, rushed into my home and saw my parents. And I said, come outside. I think there may be a power cut caused by a strange light. And they didn't react to me. They just thought I was silly, and they didn't get up. I then went out into the garden, looked at back at my house, and saw this white object coming over my rooftop. And I was at the bottom of the garden, and I put my hand up as if I'm answering a question in class. And no sooner did I do that, and it went past my 90 degrees, the whole area was plunged into darkness. So I knew that at some point that object, having moved to a second geographical area, had to have been involved in causing that power cut, because it's ridiculous. How could I predict a power cut? Anyway, so that's what got my interest. I joined a couple of local UFO organizations, read books, but it wasn't really until about it's 2002 when I went public. So I was then 42 years old, nearly 42, when I created a database for UK police officers to report UFO sightings, called the Proof Force Police Database, Police Reporting UFOs. And I didn't expect a lot of publicity, but I got a lot of publicity because at the time I was a serving police detective in the UK, and I guess it was unusual for a detective to come out and say he'd got an interest in UFOs. That then led me to do a lot of lecturing, and eventually in 2010, Steve Bassett invited me to Washington, and I received the PRG, I guess, World Disclosure Award for my work with police officers. And from that point on, I've now lectured in 19 countries, 20 countries, and it's taken me all over the world. I'm the editor of a bi-monthly, every 2 months, an e-zine. It's not in print. It's an e-zine called UFO Truth magazine, which features many of the world's top researchers, articles by them. I'm also now the vice president of the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, which is an international NGO comprising scientists, academics, and leading UFO UAP researchers. And we currently have national representatives in 30 countries. So I'm very active these days on Zoom with similar meetings like this, going all over the world. And so my background a little bit more was for 6 years I served in the Royal Air Force Police between 1983 and 1989, and then the police for almost 24 years, from 1989 to 2013, when I launched my UFO magazine. Recently I've just completed my first book, which is
we're going to talk about
Non-Human.
we're going to talk about your book also.
Yeah.
This is fascinating story you share with us. I mean, you have very interesting life. You've been, sick when you was young. You saw this strange craft, which looks like a UFO. Then you start, open all this program for collecting information from eyewitnesses. Have you had a chance to meet with Nick Pope when he was involved from the government to do research for UFO, or you not know each other?
Well, I know Nick Pope, and I have met him many times, and we've worked on several documentaries, or been involved in certain documentaries, but not for the last 3 or 4 years, because he doesn't like the work I've been doing on Rendlesham Forest. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. He thinks, and he has said publicly, that he thinks that I'm involved in a fraudulent documentary, which I'm not. Why would I? And by releasing the book now, I give the reasons why it's definitely not a fraud. Yeah. Because I've got a lot of evidence, new evidence. And so, yes, I know Nick Pope, but not when he was at the UFO desk, because that was between 1991 and 1994. And at the time, Nick was only 24 years old when he went into that role. Yeah. So he didn't run any department. He just worked there.
Okay. I have his book about this case, case in Rendlesham Forest. Also, the first time when I heard about this incident was one production of sci-fi. The name was Rendlesham Files. And I think that was a series because there was a lot of still alive witnesses who were talking about this. What new? Yeah. You have a new book. You just released it in the Amazon. The Rendlesham, Non-Human, the Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, 42 years of denial. What we don't know, looks heavy book.
It's a 5-year reinvestigation of the whole case.
Yeah.
Done through my eyes as an experienced detective. I was a detective for 19 years, so yes, I should know what evidence is and what would stand up in a court of law. So I've basically gone through the whole of the case with a fine-tooth comb and reevaluated the whole events. And during that time, I found a lot of information that the public hadn't seen, historical information. And I also re-interviewed and interviewed many military witnesses and got evidence of new sighting events that took place during the late December period, 1980. There's probably 25, 30 different new things in there and new cases that are totally unknown until I'd written the book. So it's garnering a lot of very positive reviews by researchers and readers alike. The researchers' reviews, it's got a foreword by Don Schmidt, who is the leading expert on Roswell in the world. So I'm very grateful for that, and it's a very positive review of the book. But I mean, for example, let me just give you some kind of headlines that it contains. A lieutenant ran off the road by a UFO, chased on a country road and ran off the road by a chasing UFO. She opened fire at it and discharged a M16 at it. a guy called Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, who confirms that he was involved in a second landing and that he saw entities and corroborated what the original military witness Larry Warren had said for many years. So he finally puts that to bed. He was there and sees Larry Warren next to the craft. There are the fact that all the radio channels were being recorded routinely on reel-to-reel audio tape. So where are those tapes now? The fact that there was an incident in the weapons storage area, RAF Bentwaters, with a guy called military witness called Steve Longero. I interviewed him, and he says he was inside the nuclear weapons storage area when he saw UFO shining a beam down into the bunkers, the nuclear bunkers, and it did like a grid search pattern all the way along the bunkers, as if it was looking for something. He then says that he was taken out of the weapons storage area and he was taken into the forest where lots of other military people were, and he had another UFO experience then. There is a whole gamut of things, but I mean, there's historical things like nobody realizes, apart from one or two people, that in 1985, Colonel Holt made an admission to a researcher called Ray Boucher, who was worked for MUFON, and he actually confirmed to Ray Boucher on the telephone, and Ray Boucher wrote his answer down verbatim, i.e. word for word what Colonel Holt had said. And Colonel Holt confirmed to him that Colonel Williams, the base commander, had been present at the site of a second landing, which is what Adrian Bustinza and what Larry Warren have been talking about, and that it had been recorded on film, as in motion picture footage, moving film. So that's incredible. But everybody is, whilst it was publicized in certain books, there's only been scant reference to it without the real context. Well, when I saw Ray Boucher's notes, he'd saved them, and I asked him to send them to me in a PDF. He did so. And when I saw that, as a former detective, the fact that it was recorded verbatim and there is no ambiguity, Colonel Holt admitted to Ray Boucher in 1985 that a second landing had taken place, that it was being filmed, and that the base commander of 12,000 personnel, Colonel Gordon Williams, was present. That's huge. But that has all been forgotten about. Nobody mentions this now. And I think the public have a right to say, well, you made an admission then. Why have you never talked about it again? Because he's denied that Colonel Williams was there afterwards, that there was any kind of film footage, etc. So there's lots of questions about Colonel Holt, who I know well, because I had a 7-year collaboration period with him, working on a potential film script, having met him in December of 2007. So between 2007 and late 2014, we collaborated on trying to get a film script, because I ultimately have always been interested in the cinema, and I think that the Rendlesham Forest case is destined one day to be a major feature film, because it's just so interesting. But it's complicated, many people involved, and it's not an easy story to tell. So yeah, there's lots of new things, old and new, that many people are not aware of, and I think you, as a former detective, should know. So this book is about telling the truth, and it won't it's just about the facts, really. I go back and find old interviews that were made in the days after the incident, 82, 83, 84, 85, which nobody reads anymore. And everybody thinks it's kind of more contemporary, but it isn't. There were some really very good interviews in the early 80s, and most people aren't even aware of these. And I just lay out the transcripts in the book and re-interview many witnesses, military witnesses. I've even got a new witness to a 1979 incident, which is incredible. And it's just a lot of information. It's 500 pages. It took me 3 years to write, and it's a 5-year reinvestigation, and many of the researchers who have read the book are saying that it should become the definitive book on the entire case. So that's very kind of them to say that. But yeah, that's what the book's about, and it's on Amazon in whichever country you're in.
I think that Rendlesham case is more. I mean, I believe it's more important than Roswell. I mean, Corona, 1947, because with this case in England, in UK, was so many witnesses. I mean, this is just crazy cool.
Well, what makes it very different from any other case is that it's not just one event or one day, it's over several days.
Yeah.
We now think that it's at least 3 or 4 consecutive days, and my book is called Non-Human because that's based on the conclusion of my 5-year research. And the back of the book highlights 18 incidents, one of which is now changed to 1979 because further information has come to light. So we're talking about 17 separate UFO incidents over a 3 to 4 day period in late December 1980. And most people really only think of 2 events, Jim Penniston and John Burroughs landing on one night, and then 2 nights later, Colonel Holt going out with a team of men, and he gets involved in some UFO incidents. Well, actually, when you break it down as a former detective, we're looking at 17 different events, and there's at least 3 brand new events that took place over that Christmas period that nobody's aware of until they read that book.
When you say non-human, you mean about the UFO that is not human, or you're
Yes.
talking, or
yeah,
or you
yeah,
mean
my conclude.
Or maybe you mean that they meet non-human intelligent being.
What my conclusion after that 5 years is that there were 17 events over 3 to 4 consecutive days, not only in the Rendlesham Forest, but on the twin bases of RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. So it's not just in the forest. Those 17 incidents, many of them are close proximity, i.e. the object is seen close to the witnesses. And there is no way in any of those 17 different accounts that you could describe it in terrestrial, normal, man-made kind of structure. We're talking about small glowing orange spheres, red spheres, white spheres, some the size of a basketball, some the size of a car, multiple objects flying around in the sky, zigzagging. We're talking about at least 2 landings, one of which I have 2 people corroborating the fact that on the second landing that there were entities, stroke, whatever you want to call them, silhouettes of creatures that were seen, and that the base commander was there. So really important new testimony corroborating that from Sergeant Adrian Bustinza. We've got a lot of things that are all in and around the bases, and none of them can be described in a conventional man-made explanation. So what I'm saying is, for me, the conclusion is what those men and women encountered were some kind of non-human intelligence. Now, I speculate in the conclusions at the end of the book that I think that it's likely to be of an extraterrestrial origin, but it might be something else. It could be interdimensional. It could even be ultra-terrestrial. It might be an ancient civilization that we're not aware of, who was very secretive and some mystic kind of association. But we're dealing with an intelligence that's not human in our current understanding. It's not man-made. So I do think that they were involved in something incredible, something that was sustained over several days that we cannot explain in any rational man-made way.
I have more interest about how this unusual events like a UFO or meeting with being from another dimension or even extraterrestrial, how human consciousness reacting in this interesting context. Do you have any impression about this? When you interview these eyewitnesses, what kind of emotion they show when they talk about what they saw?
Most of them are actually quite reluctant to speak about what they saw. It had, I mean, it varies different from witness to witness, but the two that saw the entities, Adrian Bustinza and Larry Warren, were stood next to each other, next to this craft on a second landing, which we now think is probably a fourth consecutive night, based on what Sergeant Adrian Bustinza told me. And when you look at it, Adrian Bustinza felt it all very surreal. He was a religious man, and obviously that made it very difficult for him to think about God and etc. He found it a difficult thing for his faith to deal with. But I mean, everybody will be different. Everybody's reaction is different, but both of them were very traumatized, many with nightmares. But much of the nightmare came from the fact that when they went out into the forest, for the vast majority, including Adrian Bustinza and Larry Warren, their weapons had been taken from them before they could go out into the forest. So at various times, when they were confronted by what they were looking at, they felt incredibly vulnerable because they had nothing to defend themselves with. Had the intelligence that they were encountering been more menacing or aggressive, they felt very vulnerable, and that caused them a lot of trauma. Both suffered nightmares for many years, still do, but less so now. But many nightmares for many years in the years afterwards. Um, when you, I mean, I've been talking to UFO witnesses for a long time because of my association with police officers for the last 20 plus years, and everybody reacts differently, but most find it incredibly profound because it changes their perspective on the way they look at the world. So this is the consciousness aspect. When these entities were seen at Rendlesham, from both Larry Warren and Adrian Bustinza, they basically say that a number of security police officers were surrounding the translucent craft. You couldn't look at the craft directly because it was shimmering, like in a prism. It was as a strange appearance. When the entities, stroke whatever they were seen, there was no verbal communication. There appears to have been some kind of telepathic thought process going on because Colonel Williams, and let's remember, Colonel Holt admitted this in 1985, Colonel Williams was present. So that means that he was in some kind of silent communication, probably telepathic, with whatever these things were. It's an incredible thing, but that's the story as it goes now.
How they describe these beings? Are they looks like a humans or they casual gray?
The different descriptions. Sergeant Adrian Bustinza, for many years, was extremely reluctant to ever mention sight of anything that was non-human, shall we say, because I think he found it very difficult to talk about because he was of a religious background. He found it very difficult to come to terms with. But he describes them as silhouettes. Something was there, the shape of something, whereas Larry Warren described them in more detail. He said that they look like children, approximately 3 feet in size, and they were each inside three separate bubbles. and it was the upper torso that was kind of just floating there. Very weird, but they wore some kind of gown, but they were very thin, very pale, and a lot of people. It wasn't just Larry Warren who talked about entities and Adrian Bustinza. In the book, I reference 15 anecdotal references to the Rendlesham Forest incident about beings being seen and their descriptions, etc. And a farmer described them as being like children in wearing white bunny suits. So how weird is that? So there was some kind of objects, creatures there, whatever you want to describe them, but there does appear to have been some kind of interaction with the base commander, or at the very least, a senior military officer from the bases. And we don't know what was said or whether anything was transferred, but that has now been corroborated by Adrian Bustinza and Larry Warren, which is an incredible revelation. And I think that the Americans and the British worked together, both at military and government level, to keep it all quiet, damage limitation, and everybody's aware of the famous Holt memorandum, Colonel Holt's memorandum that he wrote to the Ministry of Defence after the incident. And that came out in early 1983, and that confirmed that there'd been 2 UFO incidents, which was only that was known at the time. One involving a first night landing of a small black triangular object seen and touched by Jim Penniston and witnessed by John Burroughs. And then 2 nights later, Holt and a small team had gone out into the forest and had seen multiple UFOs. So that's what the Holt memorandum said. And because it came out and it should have never have been released, Colonel Holt tried to get it stopped being released, but it was too late. And when it came out in early, I think, April of 1983, and then became publicly known in October of 1983 with a big newspaper headline in the United Kingdom, that's when the world really found out about this case in a big way. And the US Air Force had no choice but to admit that at least 2 incidents had taken place on different nights. Now, I think, reading between the lines, the US Air Force, the British government, etc., the Ministry of Defence decided that they wouldn't admit to anything else other than what was in that memorandum. And of course, that only mentioned 2 events, so any others have literally been dismissed by all the main people, Holt, Penniston, Burroughs, etc., and the likes of Nick Poe, all have written them off. And I wonder why that is. And I think there's an agenda at play to control what is said to the public. And the idea of publishing the book is to say, this needs to be out there. The truth needs to be out there. These are the facts. Let the public make their own mind up as to whether they're interesting and are relevant. And as I say, I'm trying to do this to say, look, the facts are the facts. There you go. I'm going to lay them all out there for you. You make out what you want. But I personally think we're dealing with something that's arguably the most impressive UFO case in history. It is deemed second to Roswell. I think Roswell will retain its place in history because it was the first really prominent case where a craft was mentioned and possibly entities being recovered. So as its place in history, it's a seminal moment in our history on the subject. But Rendlesham is right up there as being one of the very best cases. And for me, it's an even better case because it's multiple UFOs, multiple objects, multiple different events over consecutive days, which make it very different from literally any other case, other than maybe there's an incident in Brazil called the Colares event, which happened over several months. Many military sightings and many local people saw things. So that's the only other case that I think is comparable with Rendlesham.
Gary, let me ask you, What is your guess? That UFO came because of the nuclear weapon system over there, or there's maybe another reason? Because if I understand correctly, all these weapons they built disabled for a while before to restore it functioning.
My personal belief is that the UFOs turn up because at the time it occurred, the events occurred in December 1980. There were two major events going on in the world. There was there was hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops. This is still the Cold War. So hundreds of thousands of Russian troops massing on the Polish border as if they were going to go in and put down the shipyard workers in Gdansk under Lech Wałęsa. So that looked like it was going to be a possible World War III scenario. And also in America, there was the Middle East crisis going with the 52 Iranian hostages. And I think most people don't realize that. So we were in a very politically very dangerous place. And whilst RAF Bentwaters was allowed to have some nuclear weapons, I think the real secret is that at a time of world crisis, UFOs turn up at Bentwaters and Woodbridge to do a nuclear inspection because I was told by Colonel Holt on two occasions that there were more nuclear weapons in the Bentwaters weapons storage area underground than anywhere else in Britain and Europe. And he has since denied that, but that's what he told me.
Okay, we have 2 minutes left, and my last question will be about this. I don't want to. It's horrible, that situation when Russia attacked Ukraine, and we looks like we're in the standby for another nuclear war. Do you think that if Putin have these ideas to use nuclear weapons, probably the UFO will be involved to protect the humans and the planet?
Historically, they've never got involved. UFOs have never, whilst they're interested, there clearly is an interest that UFOs have because there's a long association going back to the 1940s with UFOs seen over nuclear power plants, nuclear ships, nuclear missile storage areas, that kind of thing. But as yet, they've never interceded in any world war and hopefully will not go down the line of a nuclear exchange. I guess it's a big question, but there's no history for that. I don't think they would get involved, but I suspect that they have underground bases in our deepest ocean trenches, and I think they look at nuclear weapons as a potential risk to their bases undersea. It makes sense. UFOs are seen coming in and out of large bodies of water all over the world. So I think there are some underground UFO bases that have maybe been here for thousands of years. Who knows? They keep to themselves, but if that was their habitat and they've got a base here, they wouldn't want to see it destroyed in a nuclear Armageddon. So I think that's why they turn up at Rendlesham. It's my thought for a long time, and my research reaffirms that belief that this was about an unofficial UFO nuclear inspection.
I believe that the UFO presence in our planet will be, not exactly involved, but concerned for destroying our planet, and probably they are going to care about this to keep the planet safe and the humans. In the same time, to keep them bases underground of our planet. Well,
yeah, I hope they intercede.
Well, thank you so much for your time to be with us, and I hope we're going to have more encounters, probably in life, if I come to UK or if you come to United States for some reason.
Yes, I've been to the States several times, so hopefully we might catch up one day. But thank you for inviting me onto your show.
And off the fabric of this machine thing came this bluish gold bubble that was about a foot off the ground, and it split into three. And inside that, the upper extremities of what I only can say was a non-human